Hello, welcome to Board Game Bonkers. I'm Jay Sears, and this is a free links review. We're going to take a look at 3 different board games that perhaps use a specific mechanism. And today we're going to have a look at tile laying games, 3 different tile laying games. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of each of them, then let you know my thoughts on the differences and comparing them, which one might be my best pick. Now, before we get started, please do consider to hit that subscribe button. And you're probably wondering why this is such a mess behind me. That's because I'm literally moving the studio around. So if you see different videos with different setups, please don't panic and worry. I'm just going to be looking at different studio setups. I will do a behind the scenes video on that. But enough of this rambling, let's now get to the list. And first I'm going to start off by giving you an overview of Glasgow. Now Glasgow is a 2-player game. Now what you've got is you've got a kind of Macalla style circle of these tiles that are laid out. And each of your action tiles you'll be taking. What you'll be doing is moving your piece, your little player piece, meeple, along this trail, and it's in a circle because it represents the River Clyde. And what you'll be doing is carrying an action when you stop on the tile. Now, the clever part is when you go past your opponent, it's then your opponent's turn because you can't go until your opponent overtakes you. So you can take as many actions as you want, as far as you want to go, but when you stop, your opponent gets their go and it can take as many number of actions up to the point when it passes you. So you have to be careful how far you go along. Now, there's only 2 places where you can collect tiles to build into the city of Glasgow, which is a shared grid. That's right, both players will share that grid. And the tiles have an arrow to point in the direction where you're sitting so you know who's built what. Now, when you build that piece, then you place it in the grid. And placement is quite important because you get different points depending where you place that tile. For example, you might need certain buildings next to each other. You might need a different number of types of buildings. You might need to place the gardens in a specific spot in the corner, for example, to maximise the number of points that you will receive. And then play will continue to proceed until that grid is built, and then you'll be rounding up the points at the end of the game. Now let me give you a very brief overview of Cave versus Cave Caverna. This is a 2-player version of Caverna, very much stripped down compared to the original Caverna. Now what you'll be doing, the action tiles laid out, you'll be then taking one of those action tiles on your turn and carrying that action out. That action might be to gather resources, it might be to excavate your cave. And what you're trying to do is excavate that cave in order to create space to then build your buildings into there, not buildings, but your rooms into your cave. Now, these different room tiles will give you different abilities. For example, some might give you food, some might give you different resources, some might give you points, some might give you a different ability to maybe get get a wall built or excavate another part of your cave. And what you're trying to do is create that space to place the tiles in there. Very straightforward in how it works. There's a bit of strategic thinking with it. And the placement does matter to some degree because some of the tiles will tell you you can only place a certain tile next to a wall. And sometimes you have to build a section of wall in order to place that tile there. So let's move on to the L project. The L project is a polynomial game. You can argue it's just a tile laying game. We'll just stick with it for the argument's sake. So what you're doing, you have a tile, yes, and you'll be placing polynomial pieces into that tile to fill it up. Now, the 6 different actions, the 3 main actions you'll be doing is you can take a polynomial piece at a level 1, for example, or you can upgrade the polynomial piece to the next level, for example, 1 to a 2 or a 2 to a 3 and so forth up to level 5. And then you can, as an action, place a polynomial piece into your tile. On that tile, you can have a maximum of 4 tiles laid out. Or another action is you can place one polynomial piece, as long as you've got enough, into as many of those tiles as you like. For example, you have 3 tiles, you could place 2 polynomial pieces in 2 tiles, for example, as long as you've got the polynomial pieces and they can fit. Once you've fulfilled that tile, you'll get the points that are listed on the tile, as well as an additional polynomial piece. And then the polynomial pieces that are in that tile, you'll get them back. So there we have, that's the 3 games. Now let's talk about the kind of differences in tile laying placement element. Let's first concentrate on Cave versus Cave in Glasgow. Those are the closest. The L project is a little bit far to the left that in terms of how that operates. Now in Glasgow, obviously there's 2 places where you can collect your building tiles, and there's only 2 places. And there's always 2 of those building tiles for each of those places laid out. So you're going to the architecture and action space to collect that tile. They then place it into the grid. It's a shared grid. I think it's a 6x8, and they have to place a tile adjacent to another tile. And it doesn't matter whether it's yours or the opponent's. You'll be placing that tile, and make sure the arrow is pointing towards you, so you know who owns that building. And the interesting thing is, the placement does matter, because you've got certain tiles and an action tile and a mechanics tile. When you place an action there, you'll be able to trigger a roll, for example, and some of those tiles will trigger different resources, for example. So you have to be careful and quite clever where you place it. Your opponent can block a certain place, for example, and place their tile where you might want to place your tile, as long as it's adjacent. Some of them give you points for if a particular tile is in a corner, for example. You've got a certain number of buildings, so you're trying to work out the best way. But it doesn't feel that and sometimes you can get a kind of point salad tile laying games. This doesn't feel like that. It feels a little bit more streamlined with the scoring, and it feels a little bit more relaxing with that tile placement. However, with cave versus cave, it's more about excavating your cave to get space to place your tiles. It feels more restricted, whereas Glasgow doesn't feel as restricted as cave versus cave. Now, when you're excavating your cave, you're trying to find the right tiles to place. Ones give you different types of abilities, might be food, resources, or another action, for example. So you're trying to figure out, well, what's the best tile one? Obviously, the better tiles have different restrictions, because it'll say in the top right, perhaps there's a certain wall it needs to be placed against. It might be an L-shaped wall it needs to be placed against, so you have to build a wall section in order to place a tile there. So you're trying to strategically work out, how do I get this tile, this room, into my cave, because I need this particular configuration of the wall in order to place it. So that's quite fascinating. And you've got this bit of resource management you're trying to take care of, because you need the resources to build your rooms and to feed your people, essentially. So there are some similarities, but Glasgow feels a little more relaxed in terms of, although you do want to maximise your points, your placement, but it doesn't feel as restricted as cave versus cave. I have to excavate it first to gain space in order to place the rooms into my cave. Now let's talk about the L project, because that does feel a lot different. It feels almost like Tetris in a way, where you've got your tile and you'll be fulfilling that tile by placing your polynomial pieces in it. And it's really simple and straightforward. It's more family orientated, a lot more relaxing to play, and it's as simple as that. There isn't really much to the game. There are expansions with the Kickstarter version, and non-Kickstarter version, you can pick up the expansions. That adds a little bit more in terms of the scoring. But it really is essentially a straightforward polynomial placement game. And it feels completely different to the other two. There's a completely different feel to it. So which one do I prefer? And this is a tough one. I don't think I prefer one over the other. Although I will say that in terms of strategic depth, although none are that deep, I think Cave versus Cave Caverna is a better choice. It feels more meaningful with the actions, whereas Glasgow feels a little bit looser. Now, there are meaningful actions to take, because it depends on where you place. How far do I go in that Macala style circle? Because I go too far and then my opponent's going to get lots of actions, but I really need this action. I really need this. So it's quite fascinating and interesting, that decision-making space, but it doesn't feel as restricted as Caverna. Caverna, with the choices of action tiles, feels quite restricted, because you don't want your opponent to get that. I can either want that, but I want that. Maybe I should go for that to stop them getting that. And it feels a little bit tighter with the tile placement, where you place the tiles. Glasgow feels a lot looser. And the L project just feels completely different. It feels different. I think if I want a more relaxing, kind of flexible, relaxed kind of game, then I'll go with the L project. If I want something a little bit more strategic, then I'll go with Cave versus Cave. Now, I'm not saying Glasgow's a bad game. I actually quite like Glasgow, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and certainly turn up my nose to it. But certainly my best picks would be the L project and Caverna, Cave versus Cave, which is quite surprisingly for someone who doesn't like polynomial or tiling games. Yes, that's right. I actually don't like them, but these ones I really enjoy. Now, you could argue and say that L Project's a polynomial, not a tiling game. I'm not getting into the argument. And you could argue and say, well, it's Cave versus Cave, a tile laying game. Technically, yeah, because I'm laying a tile in my cave. So I'll argue that, thank you. But let me know in the comments down below, what would be your preferred choice out of these three? And have you got recommendations for good tiling games that you would recommend others that's worth checking out? Perhaps you can convince me to check some of those out. That brings us to the end. Thank you so much for watching. Please do consider subscribing to the channel and hit that like button as well. And thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care.